think he's probably writing in German. It's a little difficult to decipher. The Indianapolis Public Library does not have a copy, even though I've asked them twice to buy one. They don't think it's going to be a bestseller. But you can see it at Google Books if you're interested in that sort of thing. And I read that book carefully because he has a lot to say. So if you're interested in the details of this sort of thing, Schlieser's the man to go see. And I'm going to give you at a popular level, not necessarily Schlieser's point of view, but I'm going to give you something that will be, I'm afraid, a little controversial. And so I just want to go carefully today and not bestep myself in the wrong way. Let me talk about the setting of the text. The text gives the sense of time having passed when we get to Genesis 15. Abraham's been down to Egypt and he's been back. He's had time to collect very considerable wealth. He's watched Lot, his son-in-law, nephew, move off to another land and to multiply, get in trouble, get captured, and Abraham's gone and rescued him and brought him back. This is all chapter 13 and 14. So time has elapsed. Exactly how much time, we don't know. And perhaps the important thing to know is that Abraham doesn't have a son. And while he is living in the land, he doesn't own the land. In fact, Abraham never owns anything except a cemetery plot for Sarah, right? So this promise about lots of children and lots of land, Abraham never sees this happen in his own lifetime. Now, this passage, Genesis 15, is an expansion of Genesis 12. And there are two major expansions, chapter 15 and then chapter 17, which we'll look at briefly. It only has one word in there about righteousness and justice, so I won't pick it up too much. Now, remember, in building a nation, you need a people, you need a land, you need some sort of, and I hate to use the word law, but some sort of organization, some sort of constitution. And you need some bodies, I'll put it plural, to make that system work in order to have a nation. And so God says, I will make you a great nation, and we want to watch him and see if he gets to that point. Now, the structure of the passage. Look with me now at Genesis 15. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram, I'm your shield. Perhaps he was afraid of reprisals from those kings from whom he had rescued Lot. We don't know. Your very great reward. Perhaps that has to do with what he's going to say. It's a little bit unclear to me. But Abraham said, O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? And Abraham said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Can you feel Abraham pressing God on this one? He's saying, now look, you made a promise to me, and it's been a long time since you've made that promise, but nothing's happened. And Abraham presses God. He asks God some hard questions about what he's doing. And this is not the point of the justice talk here, but in footnote, I just want to say, I think we have every right to press God and to say to God, God, you're supposed to be doing so-and-so. I don't see it happen. And I'm asking about that. And I think God's very happy to have us do that because it gives him a chance to respond. And here comes the response, verse 4. Then the word of the Lord came to him, this man, Eliezer, will not be your heir. Someone's got to inherit all that cattle. That's a real problem for Abraham, to have all this great wealth and nobody to inherit it. Then the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body. And so the promise is being sharpened. A little later on, it's sharpened even further, and it said that son will come from Sarah, not from Hagar. So the promise is unfolding and developing and sharpening. This son will come from your own body, won't be Eliezer. And he took him outside and said, look at the heavens and count the stars. Now this doesn't really work in Indiana. So you need to come visit me in Kenya, and on a dark, dark night we will take you down a lonely, lonely road, and we will have you look up and you can see the Milky Way. You can almost taste the Milky Way. There is so much Milky Way. And I remember camping in the Rift Valley. The nearest light was 60 miles away, and the only thing you could see were the stars, and the only thing you could hear were lions roaring. So you stayed close to the tent and to the fire. And Abraham's taken outside, and he's saying, look up there, you've been camping, haven't you? You've seen this. And God said, if you can count the stars, that's how many children you're going to have. If indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Goodness. Now, I myself am given to a bit of exaggeration, so my children tell me. But this is really hyperbole, isn't it? Wow. Now, look at verse 6, and hold on to it, we'll come back to it. Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited to him as righteousness. That's the word we're going to work on today. He, God, also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of the Ur of the Chaldeans to give you the land. But Abraham said, O sovereign Lord, how can I know that I'm going to gain possession of the land? And then you have sacrifices, and you have a prophecy about them being out of the land 400 years and being oppressed by Egypt, and then Egypt being punished, and then them coming back out of the land. So the structure of the passage is that verses 1 through 5 is about the people aspect of the nation building, and verses 7 through 17 is about the land aspect of this nation building. And then in the middle, verse 6. Who's talking in verse 6? Who's talking in verse 6? Is it Abraham? No. Is it God? No. So who is it? It's the narrator. And I ask myself a question. Does Abraham know what the narrator's saying? You know, when you look across the neighborhood to Job, and Job lives about the same time as Abraham, apparently. Now, it may have been written much, much later, but in terms of the ethos of the story, Job is very much like Abraham, isn't he? And Job, those wonderful opening 2 chapters, are all about Job being a righteous man. But Job doesn't hear that, does he? He doesn't know that. We know that. The narrator has told us that. And so we have a very interesting little piece here. In fact, the commentators sort of go ballistic about this. They say it's the only thing like it in the narrative structure of the Pentateuch. Now, I haven't reread the Pentateuch to verify that for myself. But they say it's the only time you get this sort of incredible statement by the narrator. And he says, Abraham believed God and was counted to him for righteousness. Now, it's obvious why we want to work on the text. Here's a key word for us in terms of justice, isn't it? Righteousness. And I want to work on this text with you. There are 3 words here to explore, and they are obviously credited, believed, and righteousness. And I will take them up in this order. I will look at the word righteousness first. Now, I've sent you the notes, and I've given you the Hebrew word for that in the concordance if you want to go and look at that. It's used about 150 times. And this is the first use. In fact, all these words we're looking at, this is the first use of them, so it's very hard. Now, what makes today very difficult, and for me very dangerous, is that Paul picks up this passage and quotes it 4 times, uses it 4 times. And James, chapter 2, also picks it up and uses it, but in a way rather different from Paul. Everybody knows Paul's use. People aren't quite so sure about James's use. But now I want to remind you how I'm doing this. I am reading the story from within the story. I put a question about that on Facebook, so you can respond to that. I'm reading from within the story. And I'm only trying to ascertain what the actors know, and in this case, I presume the actor doesn't know much. I mean, what's said to him here, the stars and the land and so on, but he doesn't know verse 6, as far as we know. And what the narrator knows. And since it's this passage I want to focus on, verse 6, it's really what the narrator knows, and therefore my parameter for looking at things is the Pentateuch, because I assume that one narrator, one person wrote the whole Pentateuch, and so I will use that as my place to fish for things. Now, let me tell you the problem up front, all right? The problem is that Paul quotes this verse and says something like this. He says, Abraham believed in God, and God imputed to him righteousness. You've heard that word, haven't you? And I believe that. And I accept that. If you say to me, do you believe in justification by faith in Christ alone? I'd say, amen, absolutely. But I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that that's what this text in its context means. Are you with me? So the problem here is the problem that you know too much. You know things down here, and the tendency is to read the Bible backwards. Huh? And I'm trying to read the Bible forwards as a story because I think that's interesting. And also because I actually do believe that's the way it ought to be read. And that's the way the first people read it, and I'm not going to read things back into it. Now, you can see those references in the notes I've sent you, and you can look them up and meditate on them this afternoon before you take your nap. Now, what does righteousness mean? What did the first readers actually understand by the term righteousness? This word is only used about 6 times in the early part of the Pentateuch, and so I'm going to look at these 6, and I'm going to ask you to look at them with me. So let's turn to chapter 18, verse 19, and I want to ask, what does it mean in each case? What does the word zadakah mean in each one of these uses? Chapter 18, verse 19, and this is the text we'll look at week after next in some detail. It's perhaps the most critical of all the texts for justice building. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children, speaking of Abraham, and his household after him, to keep the way of the Lord. So we're talking about behavior, the way of the Lord. What does that mean? Doing what is, and here's our word, right. Now it has different translations in different places, which makes for a little bit of confusion. Doing what is right and just, and we'll come back and pick up that word just because it's this pair that's so critical. So that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised. The next passage, chapter 30, verse 33, it's Jacob protesting to Laban about his wages. You know, they had a fight about this, and Laban said, you're cheating. And Job says, no. And he says, and my honesty. And zadakah is translated here, honesty. My honest behavior. King James has righteousness. My honesty will testify for me in the future. Whenever you check on the wages you have paid for any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark-colored, will be considered stolen. And so righteousness here has to do with stealing and not stealing, with honesty. That's what zadakah means here. Now 625 is very interesting. This comes right after the giving of the law in Deuteronomy chapter 5. And Moses says, and if we are careful to obey all this law, so this is behavior, before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us, that will be our righteousness. A bit awkward, isn't it? In the next passage, Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 4. Now, I didn't write these all out. I may not take time to read the whole thing, but you'll get the flavor. Let me just read one of them. It occurs 3 times here. And Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 4 says, after the Lord your God has driven them out before you, talking about the people living in Canaan, do not say to yourselves, the Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. No, it is on account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity. You see how the word is being used? That you're going to take possession of the land, but on account of their wickedness. So righteousness here stands paired with integrity. It stands over against wickedness. It has to do with behavior. And then Deuteronomy 24:13, which is a lovely little text, one of these wonderful bits that we'll come to eventually when we get to the law, where it says, it's a minor law, but a very important one, return his coat. This is a man that you've lent some money to, and you've taken his coat as surety, as a pledge, and the coat serves as a coat by day and as a blanket by night. All right? So it says, return his coat to him by sunset, because actually it gets cold in Israel at night. You know that? Yeah, it gets cold in Israel at night. You need something. Return his cloak to him by sunset, so this is a behavior, so that he may sleep in it. Then he will thank you, and it will be regarded to you as a righteous act. It's again Zadokah, translated this time, righteous act. Or in other translations, it will be righteousness to you before the Lord. Your behavior of returning that coat to the man to whom you made a loan, that's righteousness. All right? Now, when you look at these, oh, there's one more. Deuteronomy 33:22. Let me read that one to you. This one's a little bit different. This is the list of the tribes, and it's about Gad. Gad chose the best land for himself. The leader's portion was kept for him. This is 33:21, of Deuteronomy. He chose the best land for himself. The leader's portion was kept for him. When the heads of the people assembled, he carried out the Lord's righteous will. It's Zadokah. And his judgments. It's that word that we'll pick up again next week, where it says just, concerning Israel. Now, exactly what's being talked about here is not terribly clear to me, but he's doing something that is right, some sort of right will. Now, my conclusion here is that all these uses that the narrator knows about and actually wrote, and that the reader will know about, that all these uses of Zadokah, without exception, have to do with right behavior. You see that? They all have to do with right behavior. Now, that doesn't mean that it absolutely has to be right behavior in this text. But I certainly think it creates the presumption that we need to look at that, and that if it fits, that that's probably the right word to put in here. All right? Now, let's take up the next word, which is really quite difficult. Credited. Credited. It's a somewhat commercial term, as credit in English even implies, although you'll see other uses of it, reckoned and evaluate. And this is the first use of it here. A lot of people go across to Leviticus and find the word there. It's used very infrequently in the sense it's used in Leviticus. In Leviticus, it's used about imputing. And so it can have that sense, but it's in a sacrificial, or what people will call a cultic context. So it's a very circumscribed context, not used that way very often. I doubt that that's really the right way to go about it, although many of the commentators have gone down that path. I think it's more likely, and turn with me now to Psalm 106. Now I'm going way down to Psalm 106, something I wouldn't usually do. I try to stay a little closer to home. But what is striking about Psalm 106 is it's the only other place in the whole Hebrew Bible where the term righteous and credit are used together. So they're used in Genesis 15:6, and they're used here in Psalm 106 and verse 30. Let's look at Psalm 106 and verse 30. But Phinehas, and you need to go back and read the story in Numbers 25. He's the one who took the spear and drove it through people who were committing adultery and stopped wickedness. But Phinehas stood up and intervened, the little story I just told you. And the plague, which was sweeping through the camp, so this goes all the way back to the time of the Exodus, was checked. Now this act that he did, putting the spear through this adulterous couple, this was credited, there's our word, to him as righteousness. That's our other word. For endless generations to come. So in what sense was that credited to him? What is the text talking about? And I think, now I'm not absolutely sure on this one, all right? Is it okay to be unsure? I mean, maybe if I was upstairs preaching, I have to be sure. But we're downstairs talking, and maybe we can be a little less sure, huh? And we have a webpage to discuss these things on. And I'm still learning. I mean, I'm only 69, so I'm not 70 yet. When I get to 70, then I should know something. But I think that the right spin of this word is to say, Abraham believed. Now, the word believed is fairly straightforward, and it's only the tense that's worried about by scholars. And there's more or less general agreement that it means he has been believing in the past, and now he believes once again, all right? It's that sort of tense. So when it says, Abraham, again, as it were, believed what the Lord said, and let's just pause for a minute and ask, what was it he was saying? He was talking about people, and he was talking about land. So when it says he believed this, he believed in the Lord, but he believed in the Lord about his word. And in that sense, Abraham forms a sharp contrast to Adam and Eve, who didn't believe the word of God. So he believed in this word, this incredible word, this impossible word. I mean, we sort of take it, we say, oh, sure, this is going to happen. But for Abraham, this is an impossible word. And he believed in this impossible word, and God said, I count that as a righteous act. Abraham, of course, he's not talking to Abraham, he's talking to us, the readers. Reader, I want you to know that what Abraham just did in his believing that impossible word, that was the right thing to do. I count that as right. I give him credit for that. Now, it's taken me weeks to think about that. I'll give you 30 seconds to sort of catch up. What I'm not saying, let me be clear, what I'm not saying is Abraham believed this word and God said, I impute to you righteousness. Now, I believe that God does impute to people righteousness, all right? But not here, later, all right? And just trying to read it within the text. Now, you say, do you have any other evidence for this, that this really is the right way to read it? Well, I think so. Let me give you a couple other contextual clues. And how else would you discuss a text apart from context? And on the Facebook, people are beginning to get interested in talking about how to interpret. And actually, I've not given you my chapter 1 because, well, I'm not ready to give you my chapter 1. But in chapter 1, I try to explain to you how I do this thing called biblical theology. But the key is always context, isn't it? Historical context, literary context, social context, theological context. And here I want to pay close attention to the storyline. If I take the passage to mean Abraham believed God and at that point in time he was justified by faith, then what was going on in chapter 12? Wasn't he believing in chapter 12? Didn't it take faith to leave his country, his home, his clan? Wasn't he believing? Well, the verb tense certainly indicates that he was believing, although this is the first time the word is used, but the reality is present before that. So I think there's a contextual clue there that surely this is not the point at which, to put it very crudely and to read the Bible very backwards, at which Abraham was saved. All right? I don't think Abraham got saved here. I don't think that's really a very helpful way to enter into the story. The other thing that gives me a bit of pause, and that is, it seems to me that what God's doing is he's saying, these people were naked, they were just, but they lost it. I started over again with Noah, and the marker for Noah is that he was righteous. Now that's the adjective, this is the noun we're dealing with, but they all belong to the same family. That Noah is righteous. And now I come to Abraham, and the marker for Abraham is that he's righteous. And in chapter 17, which I'll just read to you but not comment on, look at chapter 17. Genesis chapter 17, which is the other great major expansion. And while you're finding Genesis 17, let me just remind you that Abraham, at this point, is a Gentile. Yeah? He's not yet what? Not circumcised. He gets circumcised in chapter 17, and Paul makes an enormous fuss about that. So we want to pay attention to that. And at the head of chapter 17, God says to him, When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty, walk before me, we've seen that sort of thing before, and be blameless. It's the same kind of word that we found about Noah. It's a righteousness term. It has to do with behavior in society. And so it's Adam and Eve who are naked, it's Noah who's righteous, it's Abraham. He did the right thing, he behaved righteously by believing, and now he's told to be righteous. If we look sideways at Job, the marker for Job is that he is, God says to Satan, have you seen my servant Job? He is righteous. Now we're going to keep our eyes open for that marker. And I suggest for you that all the way through the story, that the central marker for the characters of God, and here I want to keep you awake, is not holiness. It's not holiness. Now we'll come to holiness. It's very important. But the central marker is not holiness. God doesn't say about these people, he's a holy man. No, no, no. What God says about people, the kind of people that God's looking for, the kind of people that God makes covenant with, are righteous people. That's the way the story unfolds. That's the way the story is told. So I want to leave that piece with you and suggest that the storyline itself with the markers of these people being called righteous fits in with this. Now, just a couple little bits to mop up. Run your eye in chapter 15 down to verse 14. We have another righteousness term, which we'll just note and we'll come back to in due course. They're going off into Egypt. They'll be mistreated for 400 years, verse 13, verse 14. But I will punish the nation they serve. The word punish, din, is a standard justice term, usually translated judge. So it's one of the standard justice vocabulary words. And we will pick that up and look at that. But I just want to note that. And I'd like to ask you to hold on to this passage for a year, because we won't get back to this for a year. Can you hold on to a passage for a year? You, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried in good old age. In the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites, do you see this, is not yet full. I will punish the Amorites, people living in Canaan, but it's not yet full. And one of the most difficult problems in the Old Testament is what's called Haran, that is the destruction of the Canaanites. You know that, don't you? Go in, kill them all. Men, women, children, cattle, nothing lives. Kill them all. I am Yahweh your God. Ooh, is that Yahweh your God? And next year we'll work on that, right? And I'm suggesting that's clearly a part of justice, but it's not the part that we usually like to own. In fact, it's quite troublesome. But if we put it within the larger context of the justice story, we can make some sense of it. And this is one of the little bits and pieces of clue that I ask you to hang on to. So you'll see that there. Now, I read to you Genesis 17, and we'll look at that briefly. The following Sunday, I'm going to look at a verse, and I want to read it to you so you can begin to think about it. We read it once, but let me read it to you again. Genesis 18. Look at verse 16. Let me just read you the text. And what I will try to do with you is to understand the flow of the text, the logic of the text, the connectedness of the text. Genesis 18:16. When the men got up to leave, these three men who had visited Abraham, he'd served them lunch, and they had said to him, Sarah's going to have a baby, and Sarah laughed. You know the story, don't you? When they got up to leave, they looked downward towards Sodom. You know, Abraham could see down there where Lot was, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. He's a good traditional person. We'll talk about that. Then the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do to Sodom? Does Sodom have anything to do with Abraham? And the answer, verse 18 is, Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations on earth will be blessed through him. Do you see that that's a compressed statement of Genesis 12? Build a nation, they shall be blessed. Shall I tell Abraham about Sodom? Yes. Why? Because Abraham's to be a blessing to all the nations. But now, how does that work? How does that work? And I think we have a very clear clue. Verse 19, for, this is how it works, for I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord, has to do with social behavior, and then very specifically in justice terms, by doing what is right. It's a word we just looked at today, Zadokah, and just. Mishpat, we'll come to that next time. So that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, maybe it's absolutely clear to you on the first reading, but it's not clear to me. And I'm going to try to decompress this text and to understand how righteousness and justice are absolutely central to the fulfilling of the promise. Now, in conclusion, let me just say the obvious. Do you see that the statement about Abraham being righteous is followed down here by the term covenant? He says, I will make a covenant with you about the land, and the sacrifices reinforce that, that there is some sort of close relationship between promise expressed in covenantal form and righteousness, and next week justice, that the great programmatic text of what God is doing on earth cannot be uncoupled from justice. Can I say that again? That the great work that God is doing on earth, building a nation, cannot, or I could maybe say should not, be uncoupled from justice. That he's building not just a great nation, but a just nation. And I will suggest for you later that holy is the way in which God keeps them just. But we'll come to that when we come to the law of Moses. So maybe I should just say one more time, I believe in justification by faith. All right? I can realize that I can already smell the fat getting hot in the skillet, and you're going to have roast young, well, maybe roast old chicken for supper and me.